The RCMP are scaling down the search in northern Manitoba for two suspects wanted in the killings of 3 people in BC. They say they have not had any recent confirmed sightings of the suspects, despite searching 11,000 square kilometres in northern Manitoba. The RCMP also say they've canvassed all 500 homes and buildings in Gillam and Fox Lake Cree Nation and have scoured rail lines, hydro corridors, lakes, rivers, areas of tundra and muskeg, forests and brush. And all in all, over 250 tips were received and investigated. Paul McKenna is a former Deputy Director of the Ontario Provincial Police Academy and a former policing consultant for the Nova Scotia Department of Justice, and we reached him this morning in Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Deborah.
All right, so 250 tips received. That seems like a lot to me. Is that typical in this sort of case?
Well, it's a little bit, if I can say, it's a little bit like saying how long is a piece of string. I mean, the number of tips that the police will receive for any particular occurrence or incident is largely an unknown quantity. It's only when the police begin to gather them and pursue them and follow them up do we find that the police are getting absolutely useful information.
Are they helpful?
Well, again, that's a hypothetical question. They can be. We know from research in the past when, for example, when police in Ontario were studied quite closely over several shifts, criminological researcher found that they relied very heavily, even for the most serious offenses, on tips and information provided by members of the public. So, yes, they have the potential to be hugely significant and telling in making a case for the police.
So RCMP now scaling back their search in Manitoba, but now Ontario Provincial Police are getting tips in this province. So in this case, can you give us a sense of how difficult it is to really determine whether those tips are good or not?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, there's no such thing coming in as a bad tip. When it arrives, the police have to take on board everything that comes their way. That is just the nature of the business. And the analogy that I like to use in a case like this is that the bomb hoax. There's no such thing coming in as a bomb hoax. It's only determined to be a hoax after all the investigations have been done and some suspect package has been exploded or safely detonated. So when tips come into the police, they all have kind of equal value unless they know the source and unless they have the person is providing them with immediately honest firsthand information. The police have very little way of judging until they've put it through their investigative machinery.
So in this case, then, there's no good tip versus a bad tip until they've actually followed through.
Absolutely, and that's why the police are in a bit of a conundrum because they have to take on board everything that comes their way. So there's no litmus test at the beginning unless they have prior knowledge that someone is providing them with useless information and have had a history of doing that. Most times the police will take all tips at face value, pursue them to their logical limits using their investigative capacity and their intelligence gathering capacity. You know, police officers themselves will do it, but also every police service of any note has a number of crime analysts who can compute a fair amount of information and make logical connections between the pieces that they're getting.
In the case of Manitoba, when all of the officers headed up to York Landing from the Gillam area, so many resources moved up to that area, an unconfirmed tip in that case or sighting. In these cases, does that end up being counterproductive to the actual overall search?
Well, I guess it's only counterproductive, again, after the fact. You know, it's sort of a counterfactual. I talked about the hypotheticals and probabilities, but this is, well, what would have happened if they hadn't sent all those officers up and someone had eluded their net? So it's oftentimes a huge responsibility on police organizations to throw as many resources as they can, particularly when they're looking for an individual or individuals who are mobile, because we know that people have a capacity to move very quickly and surreptitiously. So I think that was not overkill insofar as sending up those resources. You really have to use what you have to exhaust the circumstances of that particular search.
We've seen tweets from the RCMP as well as comments from the RCMP asking people not to talk about tips on social media, to get in touch with police instead. Why are they doing that?
Well, because it's the right thing to do and it's a logical step. I mean, it's perhaps a faint hope because we know the very nature of social media is that it's uncontrollable, and again, it relies on the public interest to be interested in helping the police and not sharing information. You know, there's a bit of human nature at play here, where people want to be the first to know or to share something across their network of social contacts. But I think it is a responsible thing for the police to do, to say, look, come to us with your information, and maybe after the fact, in a kind of debriefing session, you can share what you were able to contribute to the police, but not beforehand, because that is truly counterproductive.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much, Paul McKenna, for joining us in Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia. Paul McKenna is a former Deputy Director of the Ontario Provincial Police Academy and a former policing consultant for the Nova Scotia Department of Justice.